Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are unpacking a totally radical, paradigm-shifting framework by Georgios Kovidis. It's called Temporal Rate Ontology. And honestly, this isn't just some minor tweak to the theories we already have. It's a massive foundational reorientation that literally flips our entire understanding of reality completely upside down. We're going to look closely at a pre-geometry framework, arguing that the fundamental structure of our universe isn't built on space at all, but rather on a strict, asymmetric relation of temporal succession.
Right. Let's just dive headfirst into this mind-bending question. What if space isn't the physical stage where reality happens? What if it's actually just a shadow of time? For over a century, modern physics has been written almost entirely in the language of geometry. We are so used to thinking of the universe as this vast physical container of space-time. But what if that container is a complete illusion? To truly wrap our heads around this shift, we are going to navigate through 5 foundational concepts. 1. The illusion of geometry. 2. Time as simple succession. 3. Maximizing future possibilities. 4. The origin of spacetime. And finally, 5. Solving physics' biggest mysteries. All right, part 1, the illusion of geometry. Think about standard empirical physics for a second, like general relativity. It treats gravity as the literal curvature of spacetime geometry, right? And most approaches to quantum gravity also assume that spacetime geometry is either fundamental or at least emerges from something else that is geometric in nature. Now, the empirical success of this is absolutely not in question. It works, but empirical success doesn't actually settle what is fundamental. Temporal Rate Ontology, or TRO for short, argues that geometry is merely an emergent illusion. A structure can encode the relationships between observables perfectly well without being the actual stuff those observables are made of. What's super fascinating here is that this framework doesn't just throw general relativity out the window. Not at all. The empirical content of Einstein's work is entirely preserved. Instead, it treats geometry like a highly effective language, one that encodes physical relations beautifully without being the actual substrate of reality. It demotes geometry, changing its status from a physical foundation to just a representation of underlying coordination patterns. Moving on to part 2, time as simple succession. So imagine you strip away everything. We completely take away space, duration, ticking clocks, metrics. What exactly is left? How on earth do you build a universe from scratch? Well, Trobos does it by starting only with ordinal succession. Literally just, this happened and then that happened. Notice what we're not assuming here. There's no clock, no duration, no measurement of how much time has passed. It relies purely on the unbreakable rule that one event gives way to another in an order that cannot be reversed. This creates a growing, branching network of events known in math as a directed acyclic graph, or DEG, where absolutely nothing loops back on itself. No event precedes itself. No closed chains exist. The network just grows by adding new events and new succession relations. This brings us to a really crucial, measurable, mathematical concept. In a universe governed only by what comes before and what comes after, reality's building blocks are literally defined by how many possible futures remain open at any given moment. This is called continuation multiplicity. If you look ahead to a specific depth of future events, how many paths are structurally allowed without creating a logical paradox or a closed loop? These quantities aren't just decorative math, they are the exact, concrete objects this entire framework is built from. Which brings us to part 3, maximizing future possibilities. Now, consistency alone doesn't actually tell us which path occurs. Consistency just tells you which extensions are allowed. So how does the universe actively select its true history out of all the admissible options? The answer lies in the principle of maximal freedom. This selection rule acts as a type of self-consistency. Admissible extensions are weighted according to the continuation space they preserve. Essentially, if a history collapses its own continuation capacity, it progressively restricts what remains admissible to it down the line. Therefore, histories that preserve a richer, much more open continuation structure naturally remain viable. The universe literally favors paths that maximize future freedom. Let's ground all this heavy jargon with an analogy, because it's actually brilliant. Imagine you're reading a choose-your-own-adventure book. Under TRO, the universe dynamically optimizes for viable future multiplicities under environmental filtering. It actively avoids dead ends. The underlying dynamics aren't pulling the universe towards some specific, predetermined end goal. Instead, they continually push the universe towards configurations that simply keep the most options open. Okay, part 4, the origin of spacetime. So if space isn't physically real at the foundational level, where does the space-time we experience every single day actually come from? Well, we calculate something called the effective temporal rate. We do this by looking at how fast the space of accessible futures expands in a given region. Now, this isn't an intrinsic property of a single event. It's a relational property of the local network. Regions with tons of admissible continuations relative to their constraints, they run fast. Densely constrained regions run slow. And when the rate of expanding futures varies smoothly from one region to a neighboring one, that continuous field, that is exactly what we falsely perceive as spacetime geometry. Geometry is just the encoding of these differing temporal rates. And finally, part 5, solving physics's biggest mysteries. This is where it gets absolutely wild. This single framework acts as a skeleton key that rapidly unlocks massive, previously unsolved problems across the sciences. Because it redefines the very substrate of reality, persistent paradoxes suddenly just begin to dissolve. By replacing geometric physical states with continuation structures governed by maximal freedom, we get a completely unified structural perspective. For instance, the infamous problem of time and quantum gravity dissolved simply by making temporal succession the primitive. Magnetic monopoles shown to be structurally impossible to assemble. The quantum measurement problem is resolved by treating observation as a coarse-grained projection. It even stretches into biology, interpreting DNA not just as symbolic code, but as a literal structural constraint operator navigating possible biochemical futures. Take the black hole information paradox. You've probably heard of it. Standard physics says information can't be destroyed. That's a rule called unitarity. Yet, Stephen Hawking showed black holes emit radiation that seems to scramble and lose this information forever, causing a massive conflict in modern physics. Well, in RTOO, this apparent loss is just an illusion. The radiation we measure is just a projection-level object. Apparent information loss is completely compatible with preservation at the base structural level, because our observation is just a coarse-grained projection of a much deeper, fully preserved continuation structure. And get this, TRO mathematically unifies gravity and entanglement without requiring a shared background space or any complex background quantum frameworks. Gravity is simply the local rate at which continuation capacity is restricted or suppressed. Entanglement, on the other hand, is the global coupling of this continuation capacity across different subsystems. They are controlled by the exact same underlying mathematical object, the continuation multiplicity of the directed acyclic graph. This reveals that entanglement isn't some spooky, superluminal influence traveling faster than light through space. Actually, scratch that, there is no space for it to travel through. Instead, it's a structural condition of global coherence acting simultaneously with gravity's constraint. The famous ER equals EPR correspondence, that's the theoretical link equating wormholes to quantum entanglement, makes perfect sense here. They are simply dual projections of the exact same non-factorizable structure, interpreted either through the lens of geometry or the lens of quantum mechanics. It completely shifts how you view your place in the cosmos, doesn't it? If the very fabric of space is just a localized representation of how fast your possible futures are expanding or contracting, it forces us to rethink absolutely everything. I'll leave you with this thought to provoke your curiosity as you walk through what you now know is merely an emergent projection of time. Thank you for joining me in this explainer. Keep questioning the substrate of your reality.